The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Canada Post is in the midst of job action by the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. What's interesting is they're not on a full strike. Instead, they're still delivering mail, just not all of it. On September the 15th, the union implemented a national ban on delivering flyers and neighbourhood mail, and this followed an overtime ban in May. Over at Air Canada, they just concluded negotiations with flight attendants. After a 3-day work stoppage earlier this summer that wreaked havoc on the airline and passengers, the attendants were ordered back to work, but the union ignored the order. Negotiations resumed anyway, and then eventually the flight attendants did return to work. Weeks later, union members rejected the company's next offer by 99.1%, but they also kept working. In British Columbia, the BCGEU has initiated job action aimed at gaining an 8.25% wage increase. The union's website says, "We escalated job action in several key areas. Public service workers who support BC's mining operations joined the strike. An overtime ban was announced in corrections and sheriff's services. Workers in citizen services and gaming also joined picket lines, adding strength to weeks of job action." But, in other words, while there was job action, there was not a full-out strike. I invited Human Resources Specialist Kevin Howlett to join me for a conversation that matters about the changing nature of labor negotiations and job action. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
The landscape around union company, union government negotiations and job action is changing quite dramatically, isn't it?
It's certainly a new world versus what it has been traditionally, yes.
So let's go back and sort of talk about what it traditionally looked like. I remember you go back to I believe it was the late 1970s. There was a postal strike that lasted 3 days, and it wreaked havoc throughout the country, and it was top of the news. If we take a look at the sort of the labor environment at that time, how does it differ from today?
Well, in my opinion, what you're seeing today versus yesterday is that you see labor engaging in, let's say, the next bargaining cycle. But they're doing so when we have come off, I think, a fairly strong economic cycle. We've had the pandemic. We've seen what's happening to interest rates. We've seen what's happening to inflation. So they are clearly, I think, focused on a catch-up mode in terms of compensation and wages. But they're also, I think, alert to the fact that the tolerance for labor unrest, that's pretty thin with the public. So they're trying, I think, to strike a balance of making their point at the bargaining table, but also trying to remain on the side to the extent that they can with the public.
Can I ask for a little bit of clarification on one thing there? You talk about the fact that we've come off a pretty strong economic cycle over the last basically 20 years. COVID was a hiccup.
Yeah.
And you're saying unions are wanting to catch up. What did unions not do as well during that economic period that was quite robust as maybe might have been anticipated?
Well, I think generally, I say this more as a general statement, the last major cycle of bargaining in this country happened 14, 15 in that
time period, yeah.
In that time period, and wages were negotiated, and in an environment where interest rates were low, inflation was almost non-existent, so they accepted smaller wage increases. The world has shifted over that period of time. So they are saying, okay, cost of living has gone up, okay. Corporations in large measure have done fairly well. So they are saying it's catch-up time.
It's a legitimate point, isn't it?
It is a legitimate point, and equally, I think when you look at some of the settlements, or a large portion of the settlements that have been made over with corporations across the country, employers they recognize that. They are putting a lot of money on the table, but they're also very alert to what's coming down the road as well.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Well, you say we're now moving into this new negotiating cycle, and the economy is not looking as robust, especially here in Canada and particularly in British Columbia. How does that then put pressure on both sides at the negotiating table to try and come up with something that is fair, acceptable, but also fits in with fiscal responsibility on behalf of those people who are writing the checks?
Great question, and that's, I think, one of the brand new dynamics in collective bargaining going forward. As we said, the world has changed. Inflation, interest rates, job losses, okay? The expectations of the new worker in terms of remote work, uncertainty around tariffs, and the whole geopolitical situation. What is a rule today may not be a rule tomorrow. So clearly corporations are saying, okay, how do we address this issue of a fair remuneration given where labor is coming from and what's happened in the past? But we also have to be alert to the fact that the world is changing, so we need to have collective agreements that are nimble, that allow us as a company to pivot to address the new reality, whether that is, remote work, whether it is job jurisdiction provisions, outsourcing, but providing some form of security for their workers going forward and a wage settlement that's fair.
So how do you negotiate an agreement like that? Because once you sort of set in ink and sign to it, you go, well, these are the terms going forward. How do you build in that nimble ability to respond to economic shocks or changes that can be acceptable to the union and can also help to ensure that the organization continues to be fiscally responsible?
In my view, I think the key to being able to deal with this environment turns on both parties being absolutely transparent with each other, okay? Keeping the lines of communication open, and this is particularly important, I think, for employers. So they educate their workforce as to what is coming down the pipe for them, how we need to position ourselves to react to a changing environment. And I think once you do that, then there are no surprises. The second point is, I think there are other means and vehicles by which you can deliver value to the employee beyond just what we have traditionally known as the fixed wage increase. And it can take forms of variable remuneration, profit sharing. When things are up, the employee participates in the upside. I recognize that there's always going to have to be a floor, and that's going to be a point of negotiations, what that floor is. There's other opportunities around, the rules around remote work, the rules around work from home, the gig worker. All of those things, which are new realities in bargaining that wasn't there in the last cycle.
So do you believe that there's an appetite on the labor side of the negotiation table to accommodate for these different variables? Because, to say, okay, well, we'll take a base rate of this, but you, the company, especially if you're talking about profit sharing, you, the company, have to be honest with us about where your finances are at and allow us to have access to it.
Well, that's exactly my point on transparency.
But do you think that both sides are comfortable with that kind of an arrangement?
In my view, and from my experience, and from the organizations that I've worked for, disclosure was a key element. It was very open to sharing the financial results of the organization. Okay, now that was a public company. Okay, there are private companies that doesn't have that same obligation. To your point, is labor prepared? I think labor going forward, in my view, I think they recognize that that is a space that they're going to have to begin to work within. I don't think at this point that they know exactly how they're going to do that. Okay?
Yeah, because I think, you go, okay, I'm going to be absolutely transparent with you, but there also has to be an element of trust on both sides that I believe that you are being absolutely transparent. Have we arrived at that point? Because how we started this conversation talking a little bit about the labor negotiation environment going into the past, and I felt at those times that there was real hostility on both sides of the negotiating table. Do you think that unions and most organizations now come with a much more business approach to saying, how do we find a solution that can work for all of us?
I think labor groups are getting there. I think there's a higher degree of willingness on the part of companies to share data with their labor representatives, to enable labor representatives to know exactly what the field looks like. Which enables them, I think, to make a realistic demand. And if they make unrealistic demands, they can always point back to say, well, the data doesn't support that type of an ask.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. You touched on another point saying that the public appetite for outright job action is at an all-time low. Do you think that this has been influencing union strategies? Because as I started off with off the top talking about Canada Post, Air Canada, BCGEU, they have been quite flexible. Yes, we're still in the midst of job action, but we're not going to completely stop working, and we're going to continue to find a solution.
In my view, I think that's I think that's one of the strategies that the labor groups are introducing into collective bargaining at this point in time. I mean, let's be realistic. It's a tough world out there, okay? And you look at you look at, for instance, the Air Canada dispute. You look at the BCGU. You look at Canada Post in particular. Okay, they have friends and family who are outside of those organizations who are struggling, either with job loss, requirement to relocate, any number of realities that face them. What's going to be the impact on tariffs? All of those types of things. So do they really want to be, out there shutting down, critical goods and services to the public when a lot of their colleagues are either don't have a job or are fighting to keep their job? So they're trying, as I said at the outset, to continue to engage in collective bargaining, continuing to get the best arrangement for their employers, for their members, but on the same hand, still remain engaged with and be seen as responsible to the public at large.
Well, and I think it's working. I mean, I can talk partly for myself. I run a small business, and I rely on Canada Post. And when they were initiating job action, I was like, my gosh, this is going to have a severe impact on me. But no, the mail still comes, and importantly so. It may not be quite as regular, but it's still coming in. And so therefore, they win with people like me who go, okay, I understand that you need to negotiate with your employer, but also thank you for paying attention to the needs of me.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say they win with you. If in my view,
in public opinion,
exactly.
Yeah.
It does establish that that image or that reputation that they are being responsible, as I said, to the public. Okay, so I agree with you on that.
But I think that it's an important fact, and I think it helps to demonstrate the way that the nature of negotiations and tactics are changing. So we talked about one of the incentives that maybe an employer has is if there's a surplus on the books, there can be some profit sharing. I have to go back to when when BCGEU was negotiating with the government going into 2010 here in British Columbia. Finance Minister Carol Taylor borrowed from your book of being absolutely transparent. This is the money that we have.
Exactly.
And her concern was, I can give you a wage increase to a certain level, but I can't go beyond that because it compounds year over year over year. But she said, we happen to have extra money that we benefited from a surge in natural gas prices due to the storm in New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina, and there was a surplus of funds for one-time use. And so she said, sign these contracts by such and such date, and we'll give all your members a signing bonus. Is this, a strategy that others can employ?
Absolutely, it is. In fact, we deployed a very similar strategy in one of the last restructurings, financial restructurings that happened at Air Canada. Same idea. This is what the books look like. Here are the risk, but over here is the opportunity for some rewards. And this is what we can give from a fixed perspective, both in terms of wages and in terms of pensions. But here is another field of opportunity on the presumption that this plan comes together. And that took the form of equity. It took the form of profit sharing. It took the form of labor representation on the board. So those are all tools that can be used going forward, to deal exactly with the dilemma, as you described, that Minister Taylor had in front of her at the time with the BCGEU.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So when unions and organizations or governments go through this kind of creative negotiation where they're not just looking at one another like you're the enemy, what's the long-term benefit to labor relations to a company when you're not in negotiation? Does that make for a better working environment?
Absolutely. And we've got to remove this whole we, they, and hostility piece out of the whole equation. The fact of the matter is the union is only as good and the union is only as strong as the company is, because the company is the common denominator to all. In terms of who pays the members, who pays the employees, et cetera, et cetera. So, based on that, and based on, as I said, transparency, and getting into, I think, a lot of those creative, non-traditional ideas builds trust, and it takes the whole, a large part of the acrimony out of the whole collective bargaining dynamic.
So when you start to do that and you start to see those improved relations, do you say, rather than waiting until we're coming up for contract renewal, Do you then employ ongoing dialogue that you can say, let's continue to work to look at the changing landscape within the economic factors that affect the company or the government, but let's also take a look at the changing dynamic of how technology is affecting or hurting people as far as their work is concerned. Does this then become much more of an ongoing process and reduce the likelihood of job action further down the line?
That is an excellent point. I actually think that is more important today, and it's going to be even more important as we look down the road, given the degree of change that's happening. Just look at AI alone, okay? And the game changer that's going to be.
Yeah.
So when you get into collective bargaining, I think the interests of both parties would be very well served if they set up processes within the framework of the collective bargaining agreement where they can sit down and talk about those issues and pivot, as I said, and make changes to respond to that environment, whether it's a technological change, whether there's a change in economics, okay, whether there's a change to how work has to be performed. All of those things, I think, are critical to the overall success of both.
So if we take a look at the three examples that I laid out off the top, Canada Post, Air Canada, BCGEU, are you optimistic about the direction in which union and company or government relations are going? Are we moving to a better working environment, which of course is what everybody wants, or are we still trying to find our way?
I think as we come off this economic cycle, and when you look at the geopolitical situation right now, particularly with some of the uncertainties around tariffs and are we in a recession or are we not in a recession? I would characterize it as we're finding our way. Okay, and I think, in my opinion, the evidence would, I think, tip the scales more, that it's more likely to have a more successful outcome versus an unsuccessful outcome.
Well, isn't that an optimistic note?
Well, because the reality is greater minds than you and I have sat down for years and tried to come up with a solution that is a substitute for what you and I know as traditional collective bargaining, and they haven't come up with it. So, collective bargaining is, I think, the vehicle, but the collective bargaining process has to be nimble enough to change with the times. Government needs to be dialed into, the value that collective bargaining brings, and have the regulatory framework around it that enables that to be successful. And, the unions and the companies have to find a way to work together to share the burden, okay, and share on the upside and protect themselves on the downside.
Well, I think that's a good note to wrap up on here and gives us a good sense of where we're at. Thank you for coming in for this conversation.
Thank you very much.